Homelessness was branded Britain's biggest source of shame today after figures showed rough sleeping in England rose by a fifth in a year, with record numbers of children crammed into B&Bs. Annual government statistics estimated 4,667 people sleeping on the streets on a single night in autumn last year, a rise of 20% on the previous year's snapshot of 3,898. The latest figure is more than twice than when records began with 1,768 in 2010, and marks the third year in a row the number has risen since a peak of 4,751 in 2017. Experts called for a root and branch reform of homelessness funding as they warned that this week's new £30 million emergency pot from central government will not solve the devastating and shameful crisis. Homeless Link Chief Executive Rick Henderson warned that the crisis was being caused by a welfare system unfit for purpose, an acute shortage of truly affordable housing, extremely overstretched homelessness, health and social care services, and a disconnect between government policies, from hospitals and prisons discharging people onto the streets to people leaving the asylum system with nowhere to live. Big Issue founder and crossbench peer Lord John Bird branded the latest rise as simply unacceptable, and that higher spending on emergency funding must not be mistaken for a solution to this crisis. The rough sleeping figures were published as separate data showed a record high for both households and children in temporary accommodation, with the latter rising by 15% in a year to 164,040 at the end of September. The number is the highest since records for this measure began in 2004. Households in temporary accommodation rose by 16% to a record high of 126,040 over the period. Shelter Chief Executive Polly Neat warned that children are being robbed of stability in temporary accommodation, crammed into B&Bs and hostels without any space to sleep, play, or do their homework. She said, "It is unacceptable that homelessness continues to rocket when the government has the power to end it entirely. Homelessness has a simple solution. A safe, secure social rent home gives everyone the chance to succeed, but there's nowhere near enough. Investing in 90,000 social rent homes a year for 10 years would give families a fighting chance and end homelessness for good." On Tuesday, the government announced that it was doubling emergency homelessness funding for councils in England to £60 million. But the Local Government Association, LGA, said funding changes mean councils have up to £76 million less to spend on temporary accommodation for households facing homelessness compared with last year. LGA housing spokesman Adam Hugg said that an uprating of the temporary accommodation subsidy is desperately needed. St. Mungo's chief executive Emma Haddad added, "We can see statutory services struggling and buckling under the pressures these numbers create. We know the longer it takes to provide people with the support they need, the more complex their support needs become. Early intervention is vital to break this heartbreaking cycle." The number of rough sleepers had the highest regional increase of 43% in Yorkshire and the Humber. It rose in all areas except the northwest of England, where Housing First projects, where housing is offered without conditions other than an individual's willingness to maintain a tenancy, are underway. The Center for Social Justice urged ministers to roll out the proven solution to ending rough sleeping, saying, "With Housing First, the government has a generational opportunity to reverse the trends of rough sleeping and improve the lives of thousands. The time for action is now." Downing Street said that the number of children in temporary accommodation is totally unacceptable, and tackling it is what our plan for change is all about. Campaigners have warned that Tory and pro-landlord peers are trying to introduce an indefinite delay to abolishing Section 21 no-fault evictions, which have contributed to the country's spiraling homeless crisis in the government's Renters' Rights Bill. Renters Reform Coalition Director Tom Darling said, "The statistics released today show the urgency of ending Section 21 immediately as it grows as a cause of homelessness." Generation Rent head of campaigns Nye Jones said, "Behind every statistic are thousands of stories of people facing some of the most stressful, traumatic, and insecure times of their lives. The Salvation Army says the rough sleeping crisis is being worsened by legislation that bars thousands of people from council accommodation because they do not meet strict priority need criteria. Priority need is used by councils to ensure the most vulnerable get emergency support and includes parents with dependent children and people with a disability. While it's essential these groups are helped, this still leaves thousands facing sleeping on the streets. Moreover, the government's plan to freeze the value of the local housing allowance, LHA, in April despite rising rents, will push more households into homelessness. LHA is the rate used to calculate housing benefit for private renters. Freezing this crucial allowance risks many not being able to pay their rent, leaving them facing homelessness. As one of the country's largest providers of homelessness services, the church and charity is calling for the government to address both these issues in its upcoming homelessness strategy. The latest official statistics show 358,370 households contacted their local authority for support after being threatened with homelessness or losing their home in 2023-24, up more than 10% in a year. Of these, 324,990 were assessed as homeless. Record numbers of households are living in temporary accommodation in England. A total of 123,100 households were living in temporary accommodation in June 2024, a record high and 16.3% higher than a year ago. The number of households with children in temporary accommodation rose annually by 15.1% to 78,420. The total number of children living in temporary accommodation has now reached 159,830. Dr. Laura Nielsen, the chief executive of Shared Health Foundation, a charity supporting families in temporary accommodation, said it should be shameful that more than 159,000 children will be living in temporary accommodation. It should be a national conversation, an embarrassment the government tackles head-on with urgency. Yet it remains a fringe conversation. Shelter analysis found 354,000 people were experiencing homelessness in England in 2024, including 161,500. That included 16,600 single people living in hostels or other homeless accommodation. Overall, an additional 44,500 people were experiencing homelessness in England in 2024 compared to the year before. The official rough sleeping snapshot revealed 4,667 people were homeless on England's streets in autumn 2024, based on single-night counts and estimates by frontline workers and local authorities. That figure represents a 20% increase in just a year and is just 2% lower than the 2017 peak when 4,751 were recorded as sleeping rough. It's also 164% higher than in 2010 when the count began. The London-only combined homelessness and information network, CHAIN, figures are considered to be more accurate than the official one-night count. The most recent annual count showed 11,993 rough sleepers spotted on London streets between April 2023 and March 2024. That's a 19% increase on the previous year's total and 58% higher than a decade ago. In January 2025, a quarterly count showed a 5% increase between numbers recorded through October to December 2024 when compared to the same period in 2023. Women are often missing from rough sleeping counts because they tend to be less visible than male rough sleepers due to the risk of violence on the streets. That means women are more likely to seek shelter in cafes, transport hubs, or other places rather than bedding down outside. A coalition of homelessness and women's organizations in London joined forces to tackle the issue in October 2022. Their first national census across England found the number of people sleeping rough could be as much as 9 times higher than the official rough sleeping count. In the 41 areas covered in the census, frontline teams found 816 female rough sleepers, compared to just 189 covered in the official count. Experts believe as many as 5,000 women could be missing from official rough sleeping counts in England. 4 out of 5 Brits think that homelessness is a serious problem, according to an Ipsos poll for the Center for Homelessness Impact at the end of 2024. The poll, which quizzed 2,142 people on their views on homelessness, found 70% of those surveyed agreed that homelessness doesn't get enough attention in society. Most people, around two-thirds, believe that homelessness will increase in the UK over the next 12 months, while barely a quarter think homelessness can be ended, and twice as many think homelessness is inevitable. But 79% of Brits told pollsters that identifying people who might be at risk of homelessness earlier, such as in health and education, would make a difference. Liga Teixeira, chief executive of the Center for Homelessness Impact, said, "These survey results highlight the pressing need for bold, preventative action to address homelessness. With over half the public supporting investment in prevention and 75% calling for affordable housing and stronger government guarantees, the message is unmistakable. Prevention and structural solutions must take center stage if we're to break the cycle of homelessness for good." While the numbers reveal the scale of the challenge, they also reflect a shared belief in the power of prevention and systemic change. This is a call to action for all of us: government, communities, and individuals. A further Ipsos poll from St. Mungo's found more than half of Brits believe there will always be significant levels of homelessness in the UK. Pollsters found that the main reason people have not given their support to others facing homelessness came down to a lack of cash, food, or clothes to donate. That was the case for 29% of adults, while 23% said there is no point in supporting people experiencing homelessness because they feel it won't make a difference. St. Mungo's urged people to donate to a homelessness organization, volunteer, or campaign around social issues to help people into longer-term accommodation. The poll found just 3% of those surveyed volunteered at local shelters or food banks in the last 12 months, while 2% said they had advocated for policy change to prevent homelessness.